And I need to and couples. So there's various settings you've got. Solar system objects, show some markers, put more labels on. So if you want to try and find Mercury, just after sunset on the 14th, this is a reasonably good time. The moon is fairly close. In the next couple of days, make sure, yep. If you go a couple of days later, it's near Mars, the moon. Then the next thing, unfortunately I left my sheet of paper with all the dates and times on it, so it's off memory. Let's go to the 29th. And way down here on the 29th, Mercury and Venus are right next door to each other. This is still just after sunset. So use a pair of binoculars to find Venus, and then you have a chance of finding Mercury right next door to each other. Now let me head to 26th, which is total eclipse night. Go away from the sun. Hopefully, let's go to you can find an object by doing one in the dark. That has the advantage is that you can then step through the time. So we're already in the middle eclipse, so 21 hours. Let's go back an hour. So the partial phases have just started. Just keep picking zero that. And then step through.
The penumbra shadow.
That would be the umbra shadow. The umbra is really hard to see. You still see it. See about half an hour after it starts. So let's just.
So you want to start looking about 5 o'clock?
Yeah, so.
If you want a good photo.
So the eclipse is happening just nearly total. And there it goes total. This eclipse is only very short. I think it's about 18 minutes long, because they're just clipping the shadow. And then let's zoom in a bit. I don't know where you see 1 or 2 stars pop out from behind the moon during the eclipse. And I think then it starts getting brighter. Now this star, I don't know which location we've got set here, but this star actually goes behind the moon just after the eclipse ends, seen from Hobart, Tasmania in general. So that's something to keep an eye on afterwards. It's a 6.4 magnitude star. With most of the moon eclipses, you have a pretty good chance to see it go in behind the moon and come out about an hour later. Got the details on the Facebook page for that one.
What was the date and time again?
Sorry?
What date and time again?
This is the 26th, the 5th, next month.
Yeah.
21:34 is about the middle of that. It's 20. No, the occultation starts about there. So there's a couple of things to look out for besides having a look at the moon. Now my challenge to all the astrophotographers out there, it's nearly impossible, is there is quite a bit of reflection nebula around this area. There's Rho Fuchs cloud. See if you can get both in the same image. I'm thinking about it and see if I can do it, but we'll see.
Blood moon and the nebulas.
Stack a whole bunch of short exposures. Now, on the 24th, a bit earlier, let's go through just after midnight. 24. This is just moving around. Now let's go to Jupiter.
This is very Stefan.
I've lost Here it is. No. Ah, there it is. I can't spell in the dark.
Did it again.
Yeah.
It's hard to see the letters on that computer.
Way down low on the horizon, just after midnight on the 24th. That's it's the night of the 23rd into the 24th. And if we zoom in on Jupiter, we've got satellites like that. We've got too many satellites showing, so you can change that by control system, moving that up here. So if we run that forward in time, and we look closely at the disk, the red spot is not visible this time. There's one satellite shadow coming on down here. A bit later on, Io starts crossing the face of Jupiter, and that is Io's shadow going across there. Io gets pretty hard to see. The next neat thing is Callisto's shadow is starting to cross. So for an hour and so, you have both satellites' shadows on Jupiter, which is always pretty cool. And then you get a shadow on Jupiter all the way through the morning till sun comes up, basically. Io pops out from the side of the moon, 4 o'clock, so gets dizzy. Anyway, you get the idea. So that's a good chance to see two shadows on the planet.
And if it's cloudy, you can use stellarium.
Yeah, if it's cloudy, use stellarium. This time of year, for this year, there's actually quite a few cases where there's 4 satellites interact with each other. Like there's two cases where the shadow of Io falls on Europa, and Europa will fade by nearly a magnitude, half a magnitude to a magnitude. So that lasts only about 4 minutes. So have a look in the yearbook if you want to try and chase those down. Most of them are when Jupiter's really low, so those are the things happening this month. Do you need to go on to do something else, or should I?
No, just does anyone have any photos to show? So it's all yours, Stefan.
While I'm plugging this in, is there another USB port on this machine?
Yes, the other side up the top.
Yeah, the power cord.
So I can't see it, so. Oh, okay, it's done. So, Musca the Fly, I like Musca the Fly because it's right next to the Southern Cross, towards the South Pole. So you have two symbols of Australia right next door to each other in the sky. Southern Cross and the fly.
Should be looking.
Now, let's get the next arrow. One of that. So here's Musco. There's various drawings you can get. This is a stellarium. Some sort of body here with some sort of tail, like stinger or something here. But it actually goes all the way over to here in constellations. So what I thought
That's the wrong one.
So what? Oh, yeah, pointer.
Which is the third button back.
Third button back.
Third button back.
Okay, so you can make these four here are easy to pick, and then depending on where you are, you can see those ones. And in the finder, you can see this line along here. So what I thought was pick a constellation and look at some objects in the constellation of different sorts and see what there is. It's one way of sort of trying to find new things to look at. So talk about this globular cluster, this globular, that dark nebula, this planetary here, and that planetary there. And one double star, they keep all the double star nuts happy. I don't know how many there are out there. So Theta Musca is the double star. It's up here. So you go from Beta, find this string here and this one in here. Now I have a book, Objects for Southern Telescopes by Hartog. It's pretty old, but the guy was using up to a 10-inch telescope to look at stuff. And its descriptions for this one is an elegant pale and yellow white pair. Ornaments of top field profusely strewn, blah, blah, blah. It's measured by John Herschel, so double stars go over back to John Herschel and William Herschel, the first sort of measurements of them. Now, so I had a look at it with my C8 telescope, old ancient eyes in pretty light blue skies. You can just see the Milky Way from my place. And the C8 is pretty old and there's a bit of film on the front corrector. So if I can see something, maybe everybody else can. So I had a look at it and I went to about 200 times on the 8-inch and you can see the pair split nicely. The secondary is pretty faint compared to the primary, but the primary is white, yellow, and the other one is a sort of dirty yellow. It looks a bit yellowish, but colours are notorious. Turns out, when I did a bit of research, that Theta is a multiple system with maybe with a Wolf-Rayet star, which are hugely bright stars, which have emission lines and they're throwing off gas, etc. And in the primary and the secondary might be one of those as well. So that's a pretty amazing star. And then
40% of stars are double stars. So I'm wrong. 40% of stars are double stars.
yeah. So this one has, I think, a quadruple plus that secondary. You can see if you're off with the telescope. Right. It's so NGC 4372. This guy. So here you've got Musca 4. Go to the gamma here, and you see that there's a triangle here. Go for that star, which hasn't got any other stars nearby in the finder, and when you look at that, there's this nice description, slightly condensed, thinly scattered outliers, about 10 minutes across. Star nearby, that one there, and then you're saying if you have up their magnification, you can see all the faint stragglers, etc. For my spot, I missed it the first time because I had too high magnification. Sent it on the star, couldn't see anything. At low magnification, I just spotted. So it'll probably be a better view. I do remember better views years ago, and it's not quite so light polluted. So that one's a tricky one, but there we go. And the other one, the way I found it was find beta, find delta, go roughly about 1/5 the way between the two, and it was there in the finder in the main field of the telescope. And that one actually is quite neat. So this is a draw. You can that star there is a bit annoying when you're looking at high magnification, but you can see the sprinkling of the brightest stars across it with the 8-inch. You can read it. It goes back to LaSalle, 1732, so we're doing old and strong here. And here is the first planetary. So, planetary nebula is the shell thrown off by an old red giant, and in the centre there's usually a white dwarf that cools down slowly. The problem with stellarium, they use the brightness, the magnitude of the central star when they're listing things. So a lot of planetaries don't show up very well. You have to up the symbols, make the symbols very faint, show up when they're very faint. But this guy, here's beta. It's also a double, but I couldn't split it. Go down there, there's a line, this star, and that guy there. Off this orange star, near that. And here's that orange star there. It's a pair. And there's a little triangle, and off here. And it looks a little bit bluish. So younger eyes will probably see it more blue than my eyes. You can't see any details, only 5 arc seconds across, but you can spot a little blue spot there. And the other one, which is down here. Now, I sort of keep going from where I found RC 4191 and keep going with these two stars. This is a string up to theta. Keep going, you see this pair here, and then a little line, and there's a star there. Put your main telescope on that, and have a look. And it's a very odd planetary nebula. It's not nice and round. It's got the sort of bar shape with twists on the end, and through the 8-inch, I can see this bar here, and I can see these stars just. There's ones in here. So that's it's an asymmetrical planetary. And I'm using diagrams deliberately rather than fancy pictures to give you it's a bit better, closer to what you actually see through a telescope. This one in particular is quite insignificant. The last object I'll go for is the doodad, and this is a 30-second exposure, f2.2 or thereabouts, ISO 800, and from the backyard. And there's Musca, there's this dark lane here, this is where one globular is, that's the other globular, and you can track down the rest of it. I suspect from the very darkest sites in the world, you might be able to spot it with your eye, but some people have seen it with binoculars. So take a picture and there it is. So that's Musca. If people like me doing ones like this, yes, give me hints of which to do next. I'll try and do things that are high in the sky at the time. I think that's all I've got.
So doodad's a technical So I've been asked to give a quick talk. I'm no expert, by the way, and I'm just a hobbyist about this mount that I've been using, called mostly astrophotography. So I'll walk you through to it and why I came to this mount and why I like it. So just a bit of a demonstration. So it's completely wireless. It's got some absolute encoders, so it's supposed to be very accurate, and it's quite light. So without that counterweight, the whole setup weighs about 4.9 kilos with the counterweight, that one there specifically, 6.5 kilos.
Wow.
And it's got a separate counterweight for heavier rigs, so it can support about 12 kilos with the same accuracy as well. So my big 102 millimeter refractor, my filter wheel and all that, it's quite comfortable, and I can do about 20 minute unguided suction quite easily. But mostly for travel, once I got there's no travel, so you connect to it basically via Wi-Fi. So as soon as you turn it on, it automatically transmits a Wi-Fi signal, and you put power to the RA axis, which is the bottom bit, and connect it via link cable to the deck axis, and it configures itself. And so you just connect to the bottom one via its Wi-Fi and can control it via the phone, iPad. So this is through the RA axis. Let's do this. Yeah, so it's using friction drives, which is pretty old technology, but quite advanced stuff, so it's pretty accurate. So this is just storing via a little phone app that I use. It's not really an app, it's just a web browser, so it logs into a user interface automatically. You don't need to configure anything. You just put in the IP address that it transmits, so you don't need to remember or store anything. It's pretty self-explanatory. About a month ago, they released drivers so you can use it with the SkyX, software, disk software, and you can connect to your astrophotography program, APT, NINA, SGP, all those sort of things as well quite easily. And does it all wirelessly, so you don't need to connect any wires. In fact, you don't need to be connected to a power supply, AC. You can just have any port that supplies 12 volt and 0.25 milliamps, but it's not, doesn't use a lot of power, so it's pretty neat in that context. Just go back to his home position. And you can track at different rates, sidereal and lunar and solar, and you can slow the rate. Before the software was updated, I was essentially taking shots with a camera, doing plate solving there, and then manually slowing to that target until it was sort of centered. But now with the ASCOM drivers, effectively you just take a shot, it plate solves and sends a command and it can center itself. So I predominantly use it for astrophotography. So I have a little talk, hopefully it's not too boring. So I use the highlights to do, and I like taking pictures, so I look up the sky and that's pretty nice. I'm into a few of the YouTube channels and got quite keen into astrophotography. I'm still learning, so quite new to everything. But the more I got into it, the more I realised I wanted to go to dark sky sites. So I used to live in the suburbs of Perth, and it was probably a quarter past 5 or 6 at best. In the city centre, where I used to stay most of the time, it was a quarter past 8. So a terrible light pollution. You can drive about an hour and a half away north from Perth, and you can get some very dark skies, so quarter past 1 and 2, so very dark. But I used a variety of trackers, and about 80% of the subs used to be thrown away because of wind or a little bit of sort of vibration. And we're talking about low focal length, probably 50mm, even 14mm, because it was so prone to vibration, wind, and just tracking accuracy. And nothing is more annoying than using the tracker without go-to. You have to learn the night sky, which is quite okay, but at some focal lengths, you're trying to fit a little target into a specific frame, you're spending almost an hour just trying to get it right before you can start your imaging session. And obviously you have to drive back home, so it takes a bit of time. I have a HGQ5 for what I use at home, and for me it works quite well. I use it guided, and I haven't had a need to upgrade it. It works quite reliably. But I wanted something that basically is accurate for when I travel. I don't want to need to upgrade it in the future. So that's not my HGQ5 around anymore. But I started with Skywatcher Medium. I'm not sure if anyone's used that, but it's like the little brother of the Skywatcher. It's very small, it's about this small, and it fits into your pocket almost. And it worked quite well. I took it to Ningaloo Reef in Western Australia, and I took some Milky Way shots with it. But anything longer than 14mm, it was quite inaccurate, and the reason was it's very susceptible to pole alignment errors. If you nudged it, or even if you changed its position in the sky, it sort of went out of alignment, and the process of realigning it, even tightening the knob, put it out of alignment. So you couldn't really do long exposures properly, or not at least throwing away a lot of the pictures. You can't stay in England with a reef forever, you have to come back home with it. And so I was like, okay, let's try something else. So I got this bigger brother, which has a bigger payload capacity, and it worked okay, but sort of exposures get up to 30, 60 seconds at about 120, 200mm focal length, but again, you're throwing away 50% of the subs, and this is around those focal lengths. So I was getting quite irritated, and it wasn't that particularly user-friendly. I mean, sure, it was light, but about double the size of this little brother. And again, it was as fiddly to set up, you had to connect it to battery, etc. But I was always on the lookout for something better. So I was researching mounts constantly, and there was a bunch of other really powerful mounts that had good payload capacity and quite good accuracy. And so there was these harmonic drive mounts that came out from Korea, like Rainbow Astro. Basically use robotics, essentially the robotic systems for manufacturing cars. So very high torque motors, they don't need to be counterbalanced, they don't need any counterweights. It's pretty cool, but they're about $20,000, $15,000. So very expensive, and then after a few early adopters started using them, there was issues with periodic error correction, you couldn't really guide, so there's a lot of problems, and it's sort of still solved, but it's not ideal. And again, they're not super light, they're about 7 to 8 kilos, but they are an option, but it didn't appeal to me. It's too expensive, and it wasn't quite what I wanted to be, because you couldn't control it without a computer. You had to be wired to it at all times, so it was a bit annoying. And then I looked at other type of friction drive mounts. So friction drives are separate to like HGQ5, which uses a worm gear and gear system to basically drive a gear. It uses two plates, solid wheels effectively, with very tight tolerances, and it uses that to drive another gear system. So it can be quite powerful, quite light, and very quiet. But it's a little bit expensive to manufacture, but it's been around for a while, so it can be quite cheap. I'm not sure if anyone remembers the old AstroTrac, which was about almost 20 years ago. It's quite popular. If you look at a lot of nice pictures on the web, a lot of people have used that to get really nice pictures, and because the tracking accuracy is very good, and it had a payload capacity of about 15 kilos, and it sort of folds up into this little shape, which was quite good. But they stopped making it, and it wasn't a go-to mount. It just tracked in a single axis array. And you had to do all the fiddly stuff with connecting it and whatnot. But then I came across a topic where the same company that made AstroTrac was making a new mount. So that was about a year and a half, so 6 months after I got into the hobby. And it was advertising itself as an AstroTrac 360. So they're identical, so if you look at that as making a right angle, they're completely identical. So you can separate the cables from the two and you can use them as individual star trackers if you want to. You can take away the counterweight system. For example, for that Red Cat Technical, I don't need a counterweight, and you can use it what's called a single arm configuration. So there's about 3 different modes you can use, so it's quite versatile. But it was expensive, it was about £2,500. But I convinced my wife and saved up for a year. I was like, this will be the only mount I need, so I sold all my other little mounts, all the other little gear, and got this. I've used it about 5 times and spent like actually taking pictures, and I've got it about 20 times troubleshooting, so it hasn't been smooth sailing, I have to say. So early adoption is always tricky. So this is the full configuration, and that's what you can see there, and that's just disassembled components. So you can see the counterweight bars, they're unscrewed, everything's made out of aluminium from aircraft, so super light, super strong. It's got a polar scope, which I've got in the bag there, but I use an electronic polar scope or sharp cap to polar line, so I don't really use it. I've got a custom adapter that I've screwed on with a plate, and I use my Master for that, so it works quite well. And again, the setup in the field is quite easy. It does use a few screws though, about 8 in total for the different configurations. But the good thing is it comes with one Allen key, and that Allen key is for everything. So it connects everything, and everything's quite nice and bulky. So if you're in the cold and you've got gloves on and you don't want to take them off, it's actually quite easy. I don't see them. You can be clumsy in the cold, but it seems to work okay, and I can set it up. It's a bit fiddly when you first get it because it's machined so it's such tight tolerance that you think it's going to break apart when you're handling it, but it's fairly robust and solid. I've taken it on airplanes, I've taken it forward driving up in beaches north of Broome, and it's taken a fair few bumps, obviously in a protected case. It hasn't had an issue, no problem, so it's very robust. And so this is just some boring stuff, specifications, but and some weight parameters specifically, and we spoke about the different configurations, so you can use it in tracker mode. So each of those individually can just be used as a star tracker, so tracks only the RA axis obviously, or you can use it in single arm, which just means without the counterweights. And the way it balances itself, you see those little triangular cross beams that are connecting the 2 axes. They essentially can pull them out and they can slide up and down, so you can balance the load with itself without a counterweight. So it works for up to about 300mm focal length quite easily, and as long as your camera setup is not too long, so you have a long filter wheel that hits the back of your truck, it works quite well. So especially when you're using like a DSLR mirrorless camera out in the field and you want to take it very simple, it works quite well. This counterweight I actually had machined custom. Usually with my Red Cat I have a filter wheel and a monochrome camera at the back of it, and it was quite long and I couldn't quite get it balanced at the height it was, kept knocking along the tripod there. So I had to use it in the full configuration so that the length of it doesn't bang into the back. Because when you use it in this other configuration of the counterweight, you have to sort of flip it around so that instead of sort of approaching each other, one's the opposite, and so the angle is hitting right at the corner. So it's a bit weird, but I'll show you some examples. But the key specs about this is basically it's a friction drive with an encoder. So I'm not sure if anyone's heard about Renishaw encoders, but effectively it's a device that uses a calibrated wheel, usually metal, with markings on it. Those markings are read by a laser device which reflects light off it, and that light is read back and it tells it where it's moved in real time in space. So it knows what sidereal rate is, and it calculates where it's supposed to be and where it is, and it corrects that hundreds of times a second. So instead of assuming it's somewhere, it is actually somewhere. And the error is about 5 arc seconds in 15 minutes, within 5 arc seconds. So more than enough for any long photo exposure, especially with the CMOS sensor. You don't really need to expose that long compared to the CCD chips. So it works quite well, and I didn't believe it, so I was like, well, just burn some money and check it out. And I was quite surprised. I'll show you some shots, but it really does work. And to put it into perspective, it has about 30 arc second error in 360 revolution. So it can do a complete revolution, so it will take about 7-8 hours, and its total error is still within 30 arc seconds. So much so that my setup I was using with a Sky Tracker and my GPO5, the little guide scope and the ZWO camera on the top of it, but I haven't used it since. I just don't need it. One of them sort of saves the weight, balance is easier, want less thing to power and supply. It's pretty neat in that context. So those are the different configurations you can see there. That's the German equatorial configuration, so which is that setup there, and the slews and tracks in the RA and deck axis. This is the single arm, so you can see how it's flipped around. So instead of pointing to each other, one's the other way around, and then you connect what's called an omni clamp. That we should go back. This is called the omni clamp, and you can see later on you can have a look at the red cat. Essentially is clamped to them, and that omni clamp is screwed onto one of the drives, but you can essentially unscrew that and turn it around, and it clamps to the device, and it's got a 3/8 adapter for Huawei, so you can just use it as Sky Tracker quite easily, or you can use it to mount it to the tripod. So you can buy 2 of them or 3 of those little clamps. You're going to sort of stack them and use 2 cameras, 3 cameras. It's quite versatile, but each one's like $200, so they haven't made it cheap. So also it's quite new. So the first generation of the AstroTrac was screws that you could actually align the polar scope to the mount's RA axis, and so it was finicky. If you had a good model, it worked. Otherwise, people had to sort of make up little custom mounts for different polar scopes to actually get it to work. But when it worked quite well. So they redesigned it for this, and essentially you can see the bottom of those axes, there's a spacing between the counterweights, and on the same on the top if you don't use it. And this polar scope essentially slots into there, and it's got its own LED that turns on. It's within the mount. And when it's off, when it's not connected, it's just not on. It's a secure connection, you can align it, and it's actually quite good, but I haven't used it because, I don't know, the places I go are usually quite dewy, and I don't know, I'm kind of getting, I suppose not at all, but I feel old. So my back and knees hurt after a long day, operating, and just couldn't be bothered getting on the floor and looking for a old-fashioned polar scope, so I just use a Master or plate solving to align. I find it more accurate anyway, so once you get a good alignment, it works quite well. So these are the various configurations. That's a 102mm Takahashi refractor, Vixen, and it's just mounted on a wooden tripod. It's not mine, it's just, this is Richard's, who's the creator of this mount, who owns a company, AstroTrac, one of the gentlemen from Britain. The second configuration is what we call the single arm, so this is almost identical setup, but it tracks in RA and deck, but without counterweights. So it's a German equatorial mount, but without the counterweight effectively. So the official counterweight weighs about 3.1 kilos. So if you use the whole setup, it weighs about 8.1, which can be a bit heavy, when you're hiking. You don't want to be carrying around 8.1 kilos if you don't have to. So if you really want a complete mount that tracks in RA and deck, but keep it light, you can leave the counterweight at home, and it's about 4.9 kilos. So for me, that's quite carryable. So I've taken it to the, to like Palma and all those sort of areas quite easily. And it does get a bit tiring towards the end of the day, but it was a lot. Can't carry a HEQ5 logo. The Wi-Fi is on. I go to the browser, type in the IP address that is transmitted by the Wi-Fi signals. You can look at the Wi-Fi name, and it's in the name connect, and that's it. That's all I do. And that's, I don't need to connect it to a computer. But for me, I like to plate solve and all those sort of things. And I have a little mini PC that's also wireless, and I just connect it via Nino or SGP. And I basically, in the middle of nowhere, I can have a full astrophotography section that's it's computerized. Go to, I have it with the SkyX, you can do the T-point modeling. So all sorts of fancy stuff, and it's quite, I like that idea. So it's a big step up from the Skywatcher. Like I said, after about a couple of months, I just found I never used it. The places where I used to use it just as a tracker, for example, if you're just going trekking and you want to take nice panoramas or Milky Way shots, you don't want to take the whole setup. So you just leave the whole thing at home and take one of the drives, and it mounts to any tripod, and it's very light, it's only 2 kilos, and you can track all night long with a small little power bank, and it works quite well. So it's very versatile in that context. So for example, this is the first shot I took with it. This was back home in Perth. This was in single arm configuration, so I didn't use the counterweight at the time. And that's a 20-minute exposure. So it's unguided. I took it with a mirrorless camera. When I saw the shot at the back, I thought it was my old photo from another trip. I couldn't believe it. So basically I've done nothing to it except convert it to JPEG so I could attach it to the PowerPoint. I haven't done any processing to it. This is unmodded camera, so I was amazed by the mount and the fact that an unmodded modern camera can produce so much signal from a hydrogen alpha 7 nanometer filter. So it goes to show you can do a lot of things. This is actually from the Mount Pleasant Observatory site. I was testing it out. That's I think where we saw the map for the first time, and I was asked to give a talk about it. This was using the broken optic, the little 135mm f2 lens is quite popular for cameras. People use it as an astrophotography lens. And I was using it in tracker, so without the weights or everything else, it was just literally just one of the drives. And I was, I think someone was talking about the Royal Fiuchi complex. I was planning to take a shot of that because I've never been able to take a shot because one, the timing, it was never in the sky when I was free, and when it was, I wasn't there, and when it did work, my camera gear didn't work properly. So that night I was determined to give it a shot. I was actually still in the testing phase for this mount, so this is just an example of 3 minutes, unguided at 135mm, and it's just raw file from the, so I'll show you the final picture. I took a photo of 23 seconds. And this is the final edit picture, and stacked inside and edited it as well there, and a little bit of touching in Photoshop. And again, it's using no darks, no flash, no bias, and no filters, so it's completely plain mirrorless camera. So that's my best shot of it. There's a few, could be better, but for 23 shots when the sun was almost coming up towards one of the better nights up here at Mount Pleasant. It was pretty low in the sky. I think that's a good result, I think.
So those dark lines are actually dust lines, is that right?
I think you're right. And the dust near the stars is lit up by the stars, so the blue ones are blue stars, the red one is Antares lighting up around it. And then above Antares and to the left a little bit is M4, the globular cluster there.
Yeah, if you zoom in, you can see the globular clusters in quite a lot of detail. So the camera takes, I think, what is it, 42 megapixel resolution image. So there's a lot of capacity to zoom in. It looks quite nice. I'm thinking blue horsehead nebula on the left there. It wasn't quite frame right. But I think if I had another shot of it, you could actually get the whole blue horsehead and the complex in one shot. And again, because I didn't give it enough exposure time, some of the red around the upper portion of the rotor field G wasn't quite replicated. But I think, with the light pollution, the area it was coming out of, you can see a little suburb there, so it was a fair bit of light pollution. But I was quite happy with it. And this is another picture, again, taken obviously, this is at the Mount Pleasant Observatory, and I was just using it in tracker mode, so the most simple setup takes about 2 minutes to set up, and I used a Sony camera again, and a 14mm lens, nothing too expensive, and I just took 180-second shots of the sky, took 3 of those shots, and 180-second shots of the, or 100-second shots of the foreground. And I stacked them in a separate software and combined them in Photoshop, and that's the result. So my impression is, I'm quite happy with the map, but let me tell you, it was quite expensive for what it is. It's, for the amount you can get like 10 sky watches. So I suppose the usage may vary, and sometimes I think to myself, was it really worth it? But I keep it to myself and don't tell my wife.
It's going to be on YouTube, you know that.
So I tell you, if you mention anything Astro, she just falls asleep, so it's fine. I'll be safe.
Probably 10 times better than the Skywatch tracker.
Yeah, that'll be a fair comment. And look, for me, I think this is, assuming it's electronic components stay alive, and so far they seem quite robust. I've operated at -10 degrees and didn't miss a bit, so I was quite happy. I think for me, probably for the foreseeable future, I won't ever need to upgrade it, and I think it's a lifelong mount. I can always use it, and I quite like astrophotography for like the panoramas and and that sort of stuff. So there you go. That's my little spiel on this.
Do you have any more images you could show us, perhaps?
I haven't really taken much more than that. I've been busy for the past month and a half. I had exams and work and all that sort of stuff. But I have a few little projects in the work now, so perhaps soon.
Excellent.
When you're doing the alignment, you use sharp cap. Then I haven't tried sharp cap, and then you have to adjust the mount in azimuth and altitude.
Yeah. So with this one,
how easy is that?
It's actually quite easy. So one thing I didn't mention. So if you go back. Okay, so the wedge, so that's the other key thing. So part of the package is solved with the wedge, so that you see the bottom bit underneath, and you can see that was the pre-final production. In the final production, they actually changed it to black anodized aluminium. And so you can attach it technically to any tripod, even a gear, whatever you want, but it comes with its own wedge, which you can adjust in RA and deck, so you can adjust its altitude and azimuth with very fine knobs. So you can preset it anywhere between 0 to 90, and then you can do fine adjustments quite easily. And the thing with this wedge compared to the Skywatcher, the Skywatcher wedge is actually quite nice compared to like something like the Ultra. But it was still thrown when you used to tighten the knob. It moved by 0.1 degree. But this one, the way it's designed, you can loosen the knob completely and it's still actually quite rigid. And when you adjust it, it stays spot on. So you can adjust it with
And there's a little scale for doing the altitude of the pole.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's got very fine color. You can have a look at it in the light. It's got very fine gradations, and it's got a super fine laser engraved pointer that tells you exactly what it is in terms of alignment. And again, it's got a built-in calibrated bubble level in the wedge itself, so it doesn't rely on your tripod's wedge. It has its own engineered bubble level. So, and I've relied on it to basically keep the mount level. And I sort of do a rough pole alignment just by taking the magnetic declination into account, and it seems to actually be quite spot on. I always have the signal octantis within view, so getting better at recognizing that took a while. But I use the pole master with the adapter and connect it to my macro take a shot, adjust the little altitude and azimuth, and lock them up, and don't need to touch it again. That night when I took that shot from the royal field tube, I thought my computer screen had frozen because it was such a good. If you remember that night, it was a very good night of seeing. There was no shimmering. It was clear. There was no moon. It was a very good night. But alas, I didn't take any more pictures because I was still testing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good.
Screen and I like the fact that it's so light.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, like, even when you point it to an object, and if you open its clutches, because it's got its encoder, it knows exactly where it is. So if you use a software and it needs to know where it is, for example, if I adjust it and turn it on and I relock it still knows exactly which RA and deck axis it is. So it never loses its space. So it knows. It knows you moved it. And this is a custom machined pole master adapter. I just connected it with a little 3/8 screw and it's in, so you can disconnect all that. It all comes off. And this is where the pole scope slots in. That's it. It's got a bunch of tracker lights. And this is the clutch system. So it's quite neat.
It's very smooth.
Yeah, it's smooth, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, not quite balanced, right? But it basically, if you look at the gear system, you can see it underneath there. Inside. So it's got one on the inside, and it grabs this big wheel. So once you're happy with wherever you want to put it, you just lock it and it keeps it in place. And these are easy to use, even with gloves, so I find it quite nice.
Yeah. And so the chap that designed this, is he a local Australian fellow, is he overseas? Or?
No, he's British.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Richard, so he's well known. He made the first AstroTrac. Nice guy.
English made.
English made, yeah.
Around the time he was releasing it, they got peak COVID, so a lot of the software took a while to catch up because he was commissioned by the UK government to make ventilators. So that's why I'm using my mouth a lot. Because
It's a lot more important.
when you adopt something in the first point.
So the same guy that made this also made ventilators as well.
Correct, yeah. And the thing is, like, you don't need to get it really just take it because as long as your system is nice, you can literally track wherever you want.
So you don't get out that often to use it, unfortunately.
Not at the moment, no. I've basically been imaging at home with my HEQ5 recently, mostly because I've kept waiting for the software updates. Doing a little few things. Well, I've got a few projects up and running. Tron Nebula and so NGC 6188. That'll be pretty good, I think, once I get enough data.
Just some clear skies, it'd be nice.
Yeah. Just being able to
it's
line them out. Yeah.
So this is the little wedge I was talking about. So to adjust it, you can just loosen this a little bit. And this is the fine adjustment. So this goes up and down. Just retighten it, just gentle. Yeah, the guy who made it said you have to be very careful with not over tightening it, but it's got a tight tolerance. It doesn't need too much pressure, and you just loosen these knobs, and you can adjust the altitude and azimuth quite easily. So with the azimuth here, yeah, left.
So well engineered, isn't it? It's just really nicely done.
That's it. And you just tighten those gently, and that's it. It maintains it. So
you've got two buttons there.
Yeah. So this
one at the top of the leg.
Yeah, one at the tripod. That's right. But at the moment, it's not seated correctly, so it tilts it forward.
And so the tripod, the AstroTrac, and these all in one thing, actually, that sort of thing
Should be more years.
So this tripod is my main tripod that I use for everything pretty much. So it weighs 2 kilos.
Okay.
And it supports 50 kilos.
That's
And it really does.
Yeah.
It really does. For example, this is about 7 kilos, 2.5, 3 kilos, 10 kilos plus the weight, 8 kilos.
easy for it.
Yeah. But it is susceptible to wind, so it's got a hook there at the bottom.
Yeah.
So you need to weigh it down. But I think if you're not careful, it causes harmonic oscillation. So I had a few years. So little things. So I think a wooden tripod would be probably better.
Got the weights in that.
Yeah, I want it to be portable, so I think I'll make it work quite well. And the way it screws, let's see, I'll show you a few things. Take the glass, give me a second.
5 pence tonight,
Is it?
Oh, that's really good. Compared to.
When I lived in England, it was about 60, 65.
Yeah.
Shocking.
I always
Like
pick the wrong
water.
time to have to transfer money. Left Europe, the Australian dollar was high.
Yeah,
Ah,
it's
right.
great that you can see the gearing like that. So,
So I'll just disconnect it also now.
I'll come around the other
This is the Omni clamp, so in this mode I usually leave it attached so that it comes with it's basically for every single screw thread on it.
yeah.
Except for those, but those aren't meant to be coming up. They're just guides to protect it from dust getting onto the drives, because the tolerances of that are basically, the guy tells me 5 nanometers. We're very happy with this.
So dust would make a difference. So is it popular? Has he had a lot of interest?
I don't know how much he actually designed it in 2018, but it took him 3 years to release it. So there was a lot of initial backers,
Yeah.
but because they waited so long to actually get it, they were like, But yeah, there's a lot of, but I think it's a little bit dear. That's the issue, Undo it is still, the way it's designed is mechanically stable, so it doesn't just slide off. It's just sort of wiggle it off. It stops there, so these come off like this. And have a look at that. So this is a single drive. So you can attach it. So I keep this wedge on one of them permanently. Other setup, just connect that to the tripod on immediately and use it. If I want to use some other fancy stuff.
It's like a spaceship.
It is.
Yeah. And the cells are at the back of his
It's interesting to know whether he was
So instead of Wi-Fi, can you actually plug it in a connection to a laptop or something?
You can't.
It has to go through Wi-Fi.
It has to go through Wi-Fi, that's right. Yeah, it has to go through Wi-Fi. But it doesn't need to be plugged in, so you can control it by any program via its own Wi-Fi. So it doesn't need a router.
Yeah.
It acts as its own router.
So is that a problem if you're out somewhere or other and there's no signals?
No, because it's got its own internal router, so it transmits a signal.
Yeah.
So any computer that you want to connect to, or laptop or phone, should have Wi-Fi these days. So it's actually quite useful. It actually saves a lot of cables. So I can essentially operate it without wires apart from the single cable, and I have a little power tank that I connect to it.
You can still plug a diode in.
Yeah, you can. I just don't need to use it. So
It's quite substantial, really, isn't it?
So when I first got it, I was like, oh, this is not going to support 12 kilos, but when you feel it, actually, it's quite robust.
Oh, yeah, yes, that's
And
right.
I pulled apart my HQ5 to belt modify it and clean all the internals and change its grease. And you realise that each of those components is almost as robust as that. There's a lot of sort of empty weight in a HQ5. That's just the way it feels,
Did you say it can take up to 50 kilos?
No, the tripod 50 kilos.
Right.
This is rated about 10 to 12 kilos, but Richard says it can probably take a lot more.
You could probably, I could pretty much put an ED80 on that and a camera.
Yeah. So I have a triplet 102 at home. That's my main imaging. And I use that with my HGP5, so I put that on this and it works flawlessly, no issue. And that's pushing almost 10 kilos.
Yeah.
So did you have a choice of colour? Did they make it just a beautiful, amazing
It's
colour?
only made in this,
Wow.
just anodized aluminium. Yeah. I think the
It's very stylish. Whatever you paid for it, it certainly looks.
You think, yeah, you're getting your money's worth.
It's a piece of art. If it,
Well, I was thinking at that price, it's pretty clever because you basically sell all your old equipment. And then you buy this sort of thing, and then you come out even. You know,
and that's all you need.
That's right.
Yeah, if you do the maths for like so you can actually buy just one of the drives.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah,
you
I
just
saw
have
that.
one.
They had for that.
Yeah, you can buy one of the drives,
I think you
two
buy
of the
this
drives,
one. You
or the
buy this
complete
one.
setup. Yeah, so you just buy one of these. Effectively. They're identical. So it's interchangeable.
Oh, they're the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, this is that's got an extension.
Yeah, so further disassembly.
Yeah, you can take all this off. Yeah. You don't need that.
So you don't need the counterweight. The counterweight that comes with it is actually a lot nicer than this one. It's more polished. But it weighs about
So why did you have that made?
because my imaging frame with my Red Cat usually is a lot longer, and if I use it in what's their single arm configuration, which is still technically German.
That's what we're hitting.
Yeah, it was long and it kept hitting the other end.
Have control.
You can make up the counterweight.
Yeah, so I went to a CNC machining shop in Perth, and they done engineering drawings and made a custom CAD for it, and they just machined it. The counterweight custom one is about half the size in terms of like width, but it's double the weight of this, almost triple the weight. But it's got these little screws there that just, if you look on the inside, screw them down and they just stick onto that. It's pretty light, it's only about a kilo. It just dents because I needed it to be able to spread out.
That's engineering too.
In the car, I've got a chain sharper for the chainsaw. It's a disc. And just every time I sharpen by hand.
It looked good just sitting in the lounge room.
That's right. It's a piece of art.
And you can basically screw this into both ends here, so
Just think all those old melted down aircraft that no longer
you
used.
can see the tolerance.
Straight in this.
There you go.
He's really put so much thought into it, hasn't he?
Apparently after it was all in Australia, all the leftover Spitfires were melted down into pots and pans.
So if you look at the tolerance of that counterweight bar, it's how it screws.
Don't be surprised if the melted down 747
Yeah, that's right. I can do that.
And basically when I carry it around, I leave this tripod, this wedge connected to it. It just saves me having to fiddle around with this 1, 2 and third screw behind. That's the most fiddly bit. You have to line up the holes.
Yeah, a lot more subtle than Star Adventure, aren't they?
Oh yeah, and you can make it as tight as possible, but he doesn't recommend over tightening. With these have a tight tolerance, so they only need to be just tight. And it won't move.
Another good point is quite often you can't get things undone easily.
Yeah, with the Skywatcher, the problem was when I first started, I bought the Skywatcher Mini, took it to Ningaloo like a complete noob, didn't know anything about anything, and I spent 2 of my days. Anything wider than about 14 millimeters, you get trouble, so just but with this, it's pretty much spot on. Once you do the polar alignments, it works perfectly fine.
This is the other parts.
Well,
Pretty good actually. But if you think about the Skywatcher, the bigger one, that's almost $800 at this time, and if you get the complete package, it's almost $150. When you get that, its wedge is bad, it doesn't work, so you have to upgrade it to like a William Optics, and that's like $200. It doesn't come with a pull scope or anything like that.
Just chipping away.
Yeah, so by the time you actually get it, equivalent, but reasonable enough to image, it comes down to almost the same price at the moment, and you're still left with $40. Basically, when I sold my Skywatch, I had another one, and the gear that I